On Larry King now, Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje. You play the father in the movie, right?
It was a very surreal experience because it was the first time I actually stood metaphorically and literally in his shoes and was looking at myself from his point of view, but at the same time being empathetic to him.
Plus, Oz was your big move.
It was a two-line character. I had two lines, and with each episode, he liked what I was doing and would add more. And by the end of the first season, he was the main character.
All next on Larry King Now. Welcome to Larry King Now. Our guest today is actor-director Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje. Adewale is best known for his work, the HBO series Oz. He also appeared in films like The Bourne Identity, Suicide Squad, and Thor: The Dark World. His directorial debut, Farming, which he also wrote, is based on his own life story and is out in select theaters now. You wrote and directed Farming, based on your own childhood. Tell me about the movie.
Well, farming was a term that was used by British social workers to describe a phenomenon that occurred in Britain after the Second World War, whereby the Nigerian immigrants coming to Britain would foster or farm their children out to white working class families. We're talking thousands of Nigerian children all over Britain, in order so that they could work and study. And the idea was that once they'd accomplished what they set out to do, graduated, saved enough money, they would then collect their children and return to their native homes. That practice became known as farming. And I was farmed at the age of 6 weeks old to a white couple in the southeast of England, about an hour and a half outside of London. The film, with the same title, follows my journey under that process.
This was unique to Great Britain?
It was. It's peculiar only to Britain and peculiar to only the Nigerian immigrants, because at the time, Britain was going through an economic recession, and it called upon its colonies, the West Indies, India, and Africa to come and help rebuild it. So it was kind of like an expedient labor force.
So how old were you when you were taken to this white couple?
6 weeks old.
And how old were you when you left?
16. And you can imagine at 6 weeks old, my white foster family were my family. My two siblings were with me, and within the house there were another about 7 or 8 other Nigerian children from other families. So we all considered ourselves as a family and our foster families as our parents. And I just grew up there as you would in Britain during the 70s. The big difference, of course, being the area where we were placed, which was a town called Tilbury Town, was notoriously racist, and they'd never been exposed to black children or black people at all. So we were the first blacks to be, placed in that environment. So it was a very racist right-wing town.
Why did you choose to direct it?
Well, it was a story that, I'd amassed a certain amount of success as an actor in my career in Hollywood, but it was at the point where I was most successful, but I was most unfulfilled. And when I looked at that, it was because there was something that was nagging me, and it was part of my past, the traumas that I suffered under this practice called farming that I hadn't really dealt with. So I began to write the screenplay, literally just to sleep at night. And by the end of 2 weeks, I had a 500-page manuscript, which I then adapted into a screenplay.
Forgive my ignorance, but how come so little of the world knew about this?
Well, because, I surmise because a lot of the Nigerian immigrants would target white working class families that were below the radar. So it would go unnoticed, and it was, easier to, facilitate because there weren't checks and balances. So that's one of the reasons I probably think that it didn't come to, wide notice. And obviously as well, in certain regards, it indicted the system. So I'm sure they didn't really want that to be known.
Now, you couldn't play yourself as a 6-week-old, so you play the father in the movie, right?
Yeah, I played my biological father, which was a decision the producers thought would be a good idea. It wasn't the intent going in. So it was a very surreal experience because it was the first time I actually stood metaphorically and literally in his shoes and was looking at myself from his point of view, but at the same time being empathetic to him. So it was cathartic, surreal, emotional, and I saw things that, I could only see about myself from that perspective.
Was it therapeutic for you?
Very.
Because you had to live with this a long time.
Yeah, and in directing it, I had to relive it in trying to impart to the actors, whether it's Kate Beckinsale or Damson Idris, who plays the adolescent version of me, what I was feeling at particular times. So it was very cathartic and, sometimes emotionally challenging, but while you're directing, you just have to keep that director's hat on.
And do you enjoy this aspect as much as you do acting?
I do, from a creative point of view, it gives you control of your own creative destiny. I got to write characters, the narrative as well. And then I enjoyed, working with the heads of the department, whether it's my production designers, the costume, hair and makeup, because all of them, they come together to, bring my vision to fruition. So I liked it a lot. And I had to really exercise a lot of other creative muscles as opposed to just working as an actor. And I worked as an actor in it as well.
But do you intend to do more?
I do, yeah.
People in farming in the movie, are they still alive?
Yes. I mean, as I said, the story depicts a phenomenon that spread across thousands of Nigerian children. So they are still alive. The children that actually were within my foster family, they're alive and spread out. And some of the parents, the Nigerian parents, never actually returned for them. So my foster family actually adopted them as their own children. So they're still very much alive, yeah.
How about the truck driver and his wife?
No, that was my mother and father, and they passed in 2006.
Did you call them mom and dad?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Do the other Nigerian children living at the house do the same?
We all did. We all regarded them as mom and dad. Some of us were there longer or shorter. But,
was it hard to go back to your real mom and dad?
It was very difficult because I'd been formed. And so when they came into my life, it was really offensive to me that somebody would try to impose a parenthood, certainly as I was a young, struggling adolescent. Obviously now as an adult, we've reconciled our relationships and I've been able to embrace both parents and both cultures. But that was a difficult process as a young adolescent, yeah.
When we come back, Adewale on the impact his childhood had on him, how he got into acting, and what's all next. Go see this important film, Farming. It's in select theaters. We'll be right back. We're back with Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje.
There you go.
I'm getting it. Okay. Did everybody in England know about farming?
No, it's a largely unknown phenomenon because of some of the reasons I mentioned, it going below the radar. So it's very much illuminating it for the British public as well.
Now you come back to Nigeria as a 16-year-old, right?
My first connection with Nigeria was as an 8-year-old. I came home from school one day and I saw an African couple in the living room. And I was told I was going shopping and then ended up in Lagos, Nigeria. And you can imagine having grown up with my white foster parents in an all-white area that was still hostile from 6 weeks old, then being thrust into an African culture that was very foreign, the heat, the smell, the food, and the language. And I was also considered a foreigner there, and it was very traumatic.
Yeah, didn't know what you were.
No, didn't know what it was.
This, I read it, it's hard to believe. You joined a skinhead gang in the 80s. Skinhead, a white gang?
Yeah.
How did they let you in?
Well, as I said, living in England at the time, in the 70s, in the area where I was, you know, living in my house, it was a breeding ground for self-hatred, really, because racial slurs and epithets were used in the house. They were commonly shown on the BBC, you know, so it was common to call young black children coon, wogs, and sambos. Out on the streets, I was constantly subject to racist attacks, had dogs set upon me, bricks thrown, just trying to get to school. So that was the kind of environment I grew up in. My father, foster father, who was a truck driver, long distance, always away from home, said, this is how it's going to be for you. If you go out there and fight them, or I'll beat you. That was the ultimatum he gave me. And he pushed me out the door at 9 years old, and I had to go and fight 3 and 4 boys at a time. What in fact happened is a part of my childhood died that day. But what happened was I began to get a reputation for being able to take a beating and give one back, which, you know, got me the notice of these skinheads that were attacking me. And, you know, at first it was a form of amusement, this black kid that, you know, was defending himself. But then I began to get proficient at it and became an ally in the sense that when they would fight rival gangs, I was a useful tool.
Wow. You would think with all of this, you would hardly become a successful actor in the United States. How did that happen?
Well, there's a huge leap. You know, once my activities there escalated to the point where it was bringing undue attention onto my foster mother. She called my Nigerian parents back in to take me away because she didn't want to lose the other Nigerian children. And they commenced with what they called a cleanup program, put me with another family, you know, that lived in a posh area, which was manicured lawns and sprinklers, very different, and put a structure around me that enabled me to study, social workers, tutors, everything. And I actually, against the odds, got a bachelor's and a master's degree in law.
Wow.
And it was whilst I was doing that, I had a part-time job working in a men's fashion store. And one day a photographer came in and asked, you know, they used to come in and use the clothes for photo shoots, and I had to wear them as part of the uniform. And she asked me, would I take pictures, you know, in the clothes? And I asked her, are you going to pay me? And she paid me more than I was earning for the weekend job. So that became my new vocation. And I traveled all over Europe and eventually to America. And it was my model agent that actually sent me on my first audition, which was Mike Fenton. He was casting for a movie called Congo in 1994. I went in, read, and I got the part. And that began a whole new chapter of my life. But it was, once I met acting, it was funny because I realized that the sum total of my life, the tough upbringing and the education, you know, the focus and the analytical skills of law, all added up to this vocation.
Coming up, we get to know Adewale better with a round of If You Only Knew. Make sure to see his film, Farming. It's out right now, and we'll be right back on Larry King Now. He directed and stars in Farming. He was one of the major figures in the hit TV series Oz. He is Adewale
Akinnuoye-Agbaje. You can sit with Adewale, man.
Okay, Adewale. Why did you change your name?
Well, you know, I thought so hard growing up with that name that by the time I came to Hollywood, I was very reluctant to give it up.
Oz was your big move, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I was living in Los Angeles, broke, trying to get roles and stuff, and I called my agent that was in New York and just said, you know, is there anything happening in New York? And she just said, there's a show, but all the big roles have gone. She actually sent me a one-way ticket, brought me to New York just to audition for the show. Alexa Fogel was the casting director. And I was so desperate to earn, I did an audition for them in every accent that I could. And she took me from that audition to the house of the writer and producer of the show, which was Tom Fontana. She took me to his house and said, do for him what you just did for me. And Tom said, you've got 1 minute. I did that in his house. And he said, I like the African character. Now, it was a 2-line character. I had 2 lines. And with each episode, he liked what I was doing and would add more. And by the end of the first season, he was the main character.
How much did you like it?
You know what? It was a wonderful period in my life as a young actor, because this was probably the first time I got to show my acting chops and range, because over TV you get the chance to flesh out a character. And Tom was wonderful because he was writing for a character, but he didn't know the Nigerian vernacular. The character was basically Nigerian. So he would write it in English and allow me to interpret it how I wanted. So there was a lot of freedom. And I recall some of the directors saying, well, he's not saying what's on the page. And Tom would say, listen, just let him do his thing. I'll cut out what I need. And what that did, it gave me such creative freedom to create this character. And we got something quite unique out of that relationship.
Okay, this is a segment we call If You Only Knew. What's the biggest risk you ever took?
Ooh, biggest risk I ever took? Goodness, coming to America.
A food you can't stand.
Sushi.
Superpower you wish you had.
Flight.
I'd like to be invisible. Proudest accomplishment.
Farming.
Stuck on a desert island, what 3 things would you like to have with you?
My Gosho, which is a Buddhist, book. I'm a Buddhist, so it's like the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. I wouldn't go anywhere without that. Water, and probably just a photograph of my mother.
Are you a Buddhist?
I am, yes.
Well, that must be really special.
It is, is because it was once I met my Buddhist practice, and we chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. This is a Japanese form of Buddhism. It was once I met the practice that I actually started writing the screenplay. So it coincided with, my spiritual evolution as it was.
Something we should be paying more attention to.
Love.
Guilty pleasure.
Sweets.
Yeah, me too. Best job you ever had?
Working on Oz. I really enjoyed that.
What's the strangest job you've ever had?
I used to be, what do you call it? We call it dustbin collector, that trash, collects trash. Yeah.
Garbage collector.
Garbage collector. Yeah, I used to do that at night while I was at college.
Where?
In London. And you find some very interesting things in people's garbage.
I'll bet you do. Best advice you ever got?
Probably from Anthony Hopkins, and he said that, he says, just be yourself because nobody gets out of this alive.
He's a great guy.
He really is. Great mentor.
You work with him?
I did, and I've had the opportunity to socialize with him and, watch him paint. And
You're not doing much lately.
No, I think he's just done Two Popes, which is a film that's going to come out, and he's extraordinary in it. But he's very content with his life,
Yeah, I know, he's an amazing actor.
He's a great painter as well,
Biggest regret?
I don't really have...
It's good.
I don't really have any. I'll try to put one out. I don't really have any yet.
If not acting, what would you be doing?
Music.
What kind?
Probably hip-hop, R&B, and jazz. And I do music. I did the soundtrack to my own film, which Island Records are actually going to be putting out. So I got to marry my 2 passions of film and music.
When we come back, Adewale will answer your social media questions. His film, Farming, is out right now. We'll be right back. We're back and we have some social media questions for you.
Okay.
Lupa Alexander on Facebook. How did you prepare to play Adebisi on Oz?
Actually, music helped me a lot because I was playing a Nigerian character. I would constantly listen to a very well-known Nigerian musician called Fela Kuti. And if you notice, in many of the scenes, I actually have headphones on, and that was really playing music.
Really?
Yeah, to keep me in.
While you were acting?
Yeah, and I often forgot to take them off, so we kept them.
Alexander Akinnuoye on Facebook. How did you start your journey in acting and film production?
Well, certainly in acting we've explored. You know, I was sent on an audition by my model agent at that time, and you know, was fortunate enough to get that, and that was where I sprung into acting. Certainly as a filmmaker, you know, I never trained as an actor. I never trained as a writer or a director. So my career has been my school. And I was very inquisitive on sets. In fact, between takes, I would sit with the crew, ask them. I was fascinated how the shots were put together. So I studied, I learned. And I used my network of acting friends. I'd work with Gugu and Butharoor, and you know, it was easier for me to access them when I wanted to hire them for the movie.
How good a model were you?
Well, I was reputed to be the top modeling in Europe at the time, the top black model in Europe. I was not rich, but I was famous.
Appropriately, Ronnie on Twitter asked, with a successful acting career, will you ever pursue a career in music? From what I heard, it sounds like you performed some of the songs in Farming. And then he said it's an amazing movie, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yes, she's correct. I wrote and performed 10 of the original tracks in Farming, which has been released as a soundtrack by Island Records. And I would love to. I think that's probably the thing I would love to do most, is pursue music, but it will always have to be in tandem with film.
Zara Sound on Twitter. How much of the movie Farming is dramatized? Are any of these personal harrowing experiences relived in the present day?
In terms of the dramatization, I'm not doing a documentary. I'm telling a story based upon my life in the medium of film. So obviously this creative license taken with certain incidents. For instance, Gugu and Butharoor's character represents the benevolence that was in my life and helped me make a transition from student to the success I became. But that was 3 or 4 people in my life. So that was amalgamated into one. And you know, there's sequences in there where my character as an adolescent is stabbing or torching people. In fact, that didn't happen. I didn't actually do that myself, but it was frequent a frequent occurrence in the environment, and I needed to depict the life and death nature of that scenario. So, you know, the essence of it couldn't be truer, but for poetic license, we had to, you know, to a movie.
Looking back, do you ever think your career would turn out the way it did?
Not the way it did. I never had aspirations to actually be an actor. You know, so I didn't have a definition. I just knew I wanted to be, as a young kid, out there. And what that was going to look like, I didn't know. So no would be the answer to that.
What's next?
Well, what's next is I'm going to start a new project in front of the camera as an actor in a few weeks. But also, there's several other projects that I'm working on. I'm adapting a book to a screenplay, and that's going to be the next project that I'll be directing.
And still taking roles?
Absolutely.
What a great pleasure to meet you.
Likewise, true legend.
Adewale
Akinnuoye-Agbaje.
That's our guest. We thank him for sitting down with us today. Check out his important film, Farming. You can see it in select theaters now, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at King's Things, and I'll see you next time.